Have you ever wondered why you have to pay just to exist? Look at your hands. They are a perfect tool, created by nature. Your genes contain the ability to build houses, grow food, sew clothes, and heal yourself. For thousands of years, your ancestors did this themselves, and it never occurred to anyone to ask permission from someone to hammer a nail into their own roof or gather medicinal herbs in the forest. But today, if you try to build a house without an approved plan, without a license, without the signature of an official who has never been on your land, you will be called a criminal. Your house will be demolished by a bulldozer, and you will be fined. Do you think this is done for your safety? Do you think that guys in expensive suits stay up at night worrying that a brick might fall on your head? This is the biggest lie we've been fed since kindergarten. The official version falls apart as soon as you start comparing facts and dates. The deeper I dug, the scarier the picture became. It turns out that safety has nothing to do with it at all. We live in a world where self-reliance is declared illegal. Recall what they teach us in school. They tell us about the Industrial Revolution as a great blessing that freed man from hard labor. They say that before, people lived in dirt and poverty, and then factories, corporations, and government regulators came, and paradise ensued. But let's look at this from the standpoint of dry logic and economics. Before the mid-19th century, the world was filled with creators. Almost every family was an autonomous production unit. People baked their own bread, built their own homes, sewed their own clothes. They were independent. They couldn't be blackmailed with hunger or cold because they owned the means of production of their lives. But such independence is a thorn in the side for any system desiring total control. You can't manage an independent person. You can't sell him anything if he can do it himself. You can't force him to work for pennies if he has his own garden and his own house for which he doesn't have to pay a 30-year mortgage. And so, around the mid-19th century, around the world, with frightening synchronicity, the rules of the game begin to change. This happens not in one country, but everywhere the hand of the new economic elite reaches. So-called standards are introduced. At first, it's presented softly, as a recommendation, then as a requirement for government contracts, and finally, as the only legal way to operate. Have you noticed how concepts were substituted? The word craftsmanship disappeared, replaced by the word qualification. The word creation was replaced by product, and the right to labor was substituted with permission to work. This is not just a play on words. This is linguistic programming that reformatted our consciousness. We stopped feeling like masters of the land and became users, tenants, temporary residents in a world that doesn't belong to us. Who decided that you must do this? Who decided that water flowing from the sky or from the ground needs to be bottled and sold? Who came up with the idea that for the right to build a shelter for your family, you must pay an amount equal to 10 years of your life? The answer lies in documents and acts adopted a century and a half ago. If you trace the chronology of the emergence of building codes, sanitary standards, and licensing laws, you will see a clear pattern. These laws were introduced precisely when large monopolies appeared, wanting to capture the market. This is not care. This is clearing the territory of competitors. The most dangerous competitor for a corporation is not another corporation, but you yourself, an autonomous, skilled person who can do without their services. Therefore, the system needed to be restructured to make your autonomy illegal and your helplessness mandatory. Look at the education system that formed at the same time. Late 19th century. The Prussian model of education is copied and implemented everywhere. What is its goal? To raise creators? To develop critical thinking? No. In the documents of those years, which can be found in archives, it is written in black and white. We need obedient workers capable of following instructions but incapable of asking questions. Schools stopped teaching how to survive and create. It started teaching how to be a cog in someone else's machine. Methodically, generation after generation, knowledge of how the real world works was eradicated from us, replaced by abstract formulas that will never be useful in life. You know how bank interest works, but you don't know how to purify water. You know the date of some distant battle, but you don't know how to build a stove to avoid freezing in winter. This is not an accident. This is an artificially created deficit of competence. We are used to thinking that progress is a linear movement upward. But what if what we call progress is actually a process of stripping away our rights and skills? Compare a person from the 18th century and a modern city dweller. That person could go out into an open field, and within a year he had a house standing, a field plowed, and livestock giving milk. A modern person in an open field will die in a week. We have become dependent on a life support system controlled by a handful of people. We traded freedom for comfort, but even this comfort is given to us on credit. We pay for it with our time, our health, and our future. The control system was built right under our noses, brick by brick, law by law. And the scariest part is that we helped build it ourselves, believing it was for our own good. But how exactly did they do it? How did they manage to convince billions of people to voluntarily put a yoke on themselves and hand over the keys to their lives? The mechanism was genius in its simplicity and cruelty. They didn't use chains and whips like in ancient times. They used paper, ink, and bureaucracy. They created a world where every action requires an intermediary. You can't just exchange goods with your neighbor. You need a cash register, taxes, and reporting. You can't just teach a child what you know yourself. You need a diploma, a curriculum, and accreditation. They inserted themselves into every link in the chain between a person and the result of their labor. And every time you pay a tax, a fee, or buy a license, you confirm their right to own you. This trap closed slowly so that the frog wouldn't jump out of the boiling water ahead of time. First, they introduced property registration. It seemed like a useful thing to avoid disputes, but in reality, it was the first step toward taxing property. As soon as your property enters the registry, it stops being fully yours. Now you are obligated to pay for the right to own it. Property tax is essentially rent that you pay to the state for living in your own house. Stop paying, and they will take it away from you. So whose property is it really? At what point did we give up this right? We didn't even notice how this substitution happened. And those who noticed and resisted were labeled marginals, savages, or criminals. The history we're taught is written by the victors, those same corporations and bureaucrats who turned the planet into one big factory and us into its staff. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. If you look at the dates of adoption of key laws restricting land use, water use, and hunting, you can see an amazing picture. The 1870s, the 1890s, the beginning of the 20th century. In different parts of the world, on different continents, governments that supposedly feuded with each other adopted nearly identical laws, prohibiting people from freely using natural resources. As if they were reading the same playbook. As if there was a single, coordinating center that methodically cut off oxygen to freedom. Forests were declared reserves or crown private property. Rivers were dammed by power plant dams. Subsoil was declared state property. Man was gradually cut off from the sources of life, herding him into cities, into concrete boxes, where you have to pay coin for every breath of air, every drop of water, and every joule of heat. Let's set aside emotions and look at dry numbers and dates. If you plot on a timeline the moments of adoption of key laws restricting personal freedom in Europe, America, and Asia, you will see something that cannot be explained by coincidence or the natural course of history. It looks like a planned military operation. Only instead of soldiers, lawyers, bankers, and officials went into the battlefield. The period from 1870 to 1920 became the time of the most massive substitution of concepts in human history. Precisely in these 50 years, as if on command from an invisible conductor, standards began to be implemented in all developed countries that forever separated man from the fruits of his labor. The pattern repeats with frightening precision. First, an artificial problem or threat is created. Then a solution is proposed in the form of government regulation, and ultimately we get complete loss of autonomy in that sphere. Take, for example, medicine and health. Before the beginning of the 20th century, healthcare was a personal matter of the family and local community. Knowledge of herbs, bone setting, and midwifery was passed down from generation to generation. Of course, the level varied, but it was a system independent of corporations. And suddenly, almost simultaneously in the US and Europe, a crusade against folk medicine begins. Strict licensing is introduced. The Flexner Report appears in America and similar reforms in Europe, which declare any treatment methods except allopathic and pharmaceutical ones as quackery. Notice, I'm not talking about effectiveness. I'm talking about monopoly. Under the slogan of patient protection, competition was destroyed. Man was deprived of the right to choose how to treat himself, and more importantly, the right to treat himself. Now, to help your neighbor, you need a diploma approved by the system. Otherwise, you're a criminal. This was the first step toward turning our bodies into a profit source for pharmaceutical giants. Health ceased to be a natural state. It became a paid service provided to you by certified specialists, following protocols written far from hospital wards. Look at agriculture and food production. In the same period, the late 19th century, processes of standardizing seeds and livestock breeds began. It seems like progress, but let's dig deeper. Traditional varieties that farmers could reproduce themselves started being displaced by hybrids that don't produce offspring or are patented by corporations. This was a time bomb under humanity's food security. Before, a peasant depended only on the weather. Now he depends on the seed supplier, fertilizer supplier, and the bank that gives credit to buy them. The independent food producer was destroyed economically and legislatively. Sanitary standards were introduced that are impossible to meet in small-scale farming, but easy to fulfill on a massive factory. Thus, the small producer was declared illegal, and his place was taken by agribusiness holdings. We stopped eating what we grew and began consuming a product whose composition is unknown to us. This is not just a change in diet. It's a change in status. From master of the land, man turned into the end consumer of food biomass. Even more telling is the introduction of the passport system and total population accounting. Before World War I, people could move freely around the world without visas or passports. Borders were a formality. Man belonged to himself and the world. But in the early 20th century, the screws were tightened for good. The introduction of passports, presented as a temporary wartime measure, stayed with us forever. Why? Because a passport is not a document of your identity. It's an inventory number for a resource. The state needs to know exactly where its taxpayer, its soldier, its worker is. From that moment, you are no longer a free wanderer. You are tied to a territory like a serf. Your right to movement turned into a privilege that can be granted or revoked. You must prove to a bureaucrat that you have the right to cross an imaginary line on a map. This is a fundamental shift in consciousness. The world ceased to be a common home and turned into a set of restricted facilities. Linguistic analysis of that period reveals even more interesting things. It was precisely then that terms began entering common usage that we use without thinking, but which program us for submission. The concept of unemployment appears. In traditional society, unemployment could not exist in principle. There was always a house to repair, land to cultivate, children to teach. There was always more work than hands. The concept of unemployment arises only when a person is separated from the means of production and forced to sell his time to an employer. If there is no buyer for his time, he becomes unemployed. This is an artificial construct of the industrial era. We were instilled with the fear of being jobless, although in reality we should fear losing our own trade. Replacing the concept of labor with the concept of employment is a genius move by the manipulators. Labor is a creative act that transforms the world. Employment is just a way to occupy your time so you don't think about extras. Let's pay attention to the financial noose that was thrown around the world's neck precisely at that time. The creation of central banks, the transition to fiat money, the abandonment of real gold backing, all these are links in one chain. 1913 in the US, the creation of the Federal Reserve System. This was a turning point. Money ceased to be a measure of the value of labor and became a tool of debt enslavement. Before, if you earned a gold coin, it was yours and retained its value for centuries. Now the money in your pocket is a state IOU that melts away day by day due to inflation. Inflation is a hidden tax that news doesn't call robbery, but which climbs into your wallet daily. The system doesn't need rich and independent people. It needs people with debts. A person with a mortgage is the ideal slave. He won't strike. He won't demand rights. He will work 2 jobs and fear losing his position. This model was implemented everywhere and simultaneously, replacing the culture of saving and accumulation with the culture of consumption and debt. Compare the world before and the world after. The world before is the world of craftsmen, guilds, family clans, and communities. This is a world where authority was built on real skills and reputation. The world after is the world of diplomas, certificates, licenses, and ratings. A world where your value is determined by a piece of paper with a stamp. We see how methodically, step by step, the institutions supporting human autonomy were destroyed. The family as an economic unit was dismantled. The husband was sent to the factory, the wife to the office, the children to daycare and school. All family members were separated and integrated into different circuits of the system. They only meet in the evenings, exhausted, to watch a screen together that tells them how to live properly. This is not the natural evolution of society. This is social engineering on an unprecedented scale. Someone might say this is conspiracy theory. But were laws passed secretly? No. They were published in newspapers. Were taxes introduced covertly? No. You get the bills. All of it was done openly, right in front of our eyes, but under the cover of powerful propaganda about progress and the common good. They told us, "Give us the right to control your money, and there will be no crises." We gave it, and crises became regular. They told us, "Give us the right to educate your children, and they will become smart." We gave it, and we got a generation unable to find its own country on a map. They told us, "Entrust us with your security, and there will be no wars." We entrusted it, and the 20th century became the bloodiest in history. Logic suggests that either the managers are incompetent, or the goal of management was entirely different. And if you look at the results, The concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a tiny percentage of the elite, and the total dependence of everyone else, it becomes clear that the system works perfectly. It's just that its goals don't align with our interests. We live inside a legal fiction. Laws are written in such complex language deliberately so that an ordinary person cannot understand them without an intermediary lawyer. This creates a caste of law priests who interpret the rules in favor of those who write them. Have you ever tried to read a bank's user agreement or a social network's? It's thousands of pages of fine print, the essence of which boils down to one thing: you are powerless, and the corporation is always right. And we sign it without looking because we have no choice. The alternative is to become an outcast, a digital hermit. The system is built so that convenience is bought at the price of freedom, and that price is rising every year. We pay with biometrics, our personal data, our attention. It's important to understand that this didn't happen instantly. If they had tried to introduce such changes in 1 year, there would have been a revolution. But the strategy of boiling the frog on a slow fire worked flawlessly. Every new restriction was introduced as a minor amendment, as a temporary measure, as care for safety. 10 years ago, they asked us to show our bag. Today, they scan us with X-rays. Tomorrow, they will ask to implant a chip. And each time, the majority will say, well, if an honest person has nothing to hide, why be afraid? This is the system's main victory. It made us justify its control ourselves. We became jailers to ourselves. We condemn those who try to go against the rules, calling them irresponsible. We demand to punish those who don't pay taxes, not understanding that these taxes go to maintain the apparatus that coerces us ourselves. The trap didn't snap shut from the outside. It snapped shut inside our heads. If you want to understand who and how controls your life, just follow the money. But not the pennies in your pocket, but the flows that create the rules of the game. We live in an economic model designed not for human prosperity, but for his endless exploitation. Has it never seemed strange to you that year after year technologies become more perfect, robots work faster, and we work more and more? By logic, automation should have given us free time, but the exact opposite happened. We turned into a hamster in a wheel that spins faster and faster. And this is not a system glitch. This is its main function. Economic pressure is the most effective whip humanity has ever invented. It leaves no marks on the back, but breaks the will more reliably than any prison. Let's go back to 1924. Geneva. In an atmosphere of strict secrecy, representatives of the world's largest electric light bulb manufacturers meet. Osram, Philips, General Electric. They create the Phoebus cartel. Their goal is not to improve product quality, but to worsen it. Up to that point, light bulbs could last 2,500 hours. The cartel decided to artificially limit the bulb's lifespan to 1,000 hours. Any factory producing more durable bulbs was fined. This is not conspiracy theory. This is a documented historical fact that became the blueprint for the entire modern economy. It was then that the concept of planned obsolescence was born. Things are no longer supposed to last forever. They are supposed to break exactly 1 day after the warranty ends. Your phone, your car, your washing machine, all of them are programmed for death so that you keep opening your wallet again and again. They turned us from users into consumers. Think about that word. A consumer is one who consumes, destroys a resource. But to buy this junk again and again, you need money. And here the second trap snaps shut: the credit system. Before the beginning of the 20th century, living in debt was considered a disgrace. It was a sign of financial insolvency. But bankers needed somewhere to dump the printed paper, so they launched a massive propaganda campaign. Through advertising, movies, and newspapers, they instilled in us that living on credit is prestigious, that you deserve to have everything right now. 1913 became the turning point. In the US, the Federal Reserve System is created, a private shop that gets the right to print government money and lend it to the government at interest. Think about it. The state borrows its own money from private individuals. From that moment, every dollar, euro, or pound in circulation is someone's debt. In this system, money without debt simply doesn't exist. Look at the mortgage. The word itself, mortgage, comes from Old French, dead pledge, or death pledge. It's a contract you sign for half your life. You pay the bank 2 or 3 times the cost of the apartment. You work 20 years just on interest. This is modern serfdom, where instead of chains, a payment schedule is used. And the most cynical part is that the bank doesn't give you its own money. When you take a loan, the bank just enters numbers into a computer, creating money out of thin air, backed by your obligation to return it with real labor. You exchange your real hours of life, your sweat and blood, for their virtual zeros. In this deal, who is the slave and who is the master? The answer is obvious. The economy is built so that you always balance on the edge. You shouldn't have savings that allow you to tell everything to hell and move to the countryside. The system of prices and wages is perfectly calibrated. You have exactly enough for food, clothes, mortgage, and a little entertainment so you don't go crazy. And now ask yourself, why did income tax become the norm in most countries of the world precisely at the beginning of the 20th century? Before that, states existed perfectly well on customs duties and excises. But with the introduction of income tax, the state claimed its right to your labor. You haven't even received your salary, and part of it is already taken. This means that part of your time you work compulsorily, like on corvée labor. And with each decade, this share grows. If you add up all taxes, income tax, VAT, excises, property tax, social contributions, it turns out that you give more than half of your earnings to the system. A medieval peasant gave a tithe to the feudal lord. We give half and consider ourselves free people. Isn't this a genius trick? Who benefits from this? Look for those who stand at the printing press and who write the laws. Corporations and banks have merged with the state into a single organism. This is called corporatocracy. They don't need independent creators. They need perfect executors and perfect buyers. Man resource. That's why in corporate reports, we are called human capital. We are rows in an Excel table, assets that must generate profit. If an asset breaks or becomes obsolete, it is written off. Look at the pension system. This is not care for old age. It's a mathematical calculation of life expectancy. The ideal citizen for the system is one who works until the last day, pays all taxes, and dies on the day of retirement without spending the fund's accumulations. We see how small business and private initiative were methodically destroyed. In the mid-20th century, when the boom of supermarkets and retail chains began, it was presented as convenience. Everything in one place, cheap and beautiful. But the price of this convenience is the death of local shops, bakeries, and workshops. Money stopped circulating within the community. It began to be sucked upward into the offshore accounts of transnational giants. When you buy bread from your neighbor the baker, He buys boots from the neighbor, the shoemaker, with that money. The money stays in the town. The town gets richer. When you buy bread in a chain store, the money goes to the corporation's headquarters thousands of miles away. Your town gets poorer, infrastructure deteriorates, and you become dependent on external supplies. This is economic vampirism disguised as globalization. And one more important detail: monopoly on knowledge. Patent law, which was originally created to protect inventors, turned into a tool to slow down progress. Corporations buy up patents on revolutionary technologies not to implement them, but to shelve them and prevent them from disrupting their old business. We still drive on internal combustion engines, although the principles of alternative energy have been known for 100 years. Why? Because oil is the blood of the control system. If every home had an autonomous, free energy generator, the pyramid of power would collapse. They don't need you to be energy independent. They need you to pay for every kilowatt that runs through their wires. The meter in your hallway is a symbol of your dependence. The system created conditions in which being honest and free is economically disadvantageous. Laws are written so that anyone trying to do business in the open, but without protection, goes bankrupt under the weight of inspections and fines. Only those who play by the system's rules survive. Those embedded in corrupt chains or belonging to large networks. This is negative selection. Those who rise to the top are not the most talented and hardworking, but the most unscrupulous and controllable. We live in the scenery of a free market, where in reality everything is divided among monopolies even before you open your eyes. Prices for gasoline, electricity, and communications are set not by supply and demand, but by collusion in closed offices. And we pay this tax on life because we have no choice. Or so it seems to us. The economic trap snapped shut when money was untied from gold. In 1971, the world fully transitioned to fiat currencies. This gave free rein to financial elites. Now they can create crises with the push of a button. They can devalue your savings with inflation overnight. Inflation is not a natural disaster. It's a tool for redistributing wealth from the poor to the rich. While you save for an apartment, its prices rise faster than your savings. This is a race you can't win if you run by their rules. And all this time, they tell us fairy tales about GDP, stock indices, and refinancing rates, hiding the simple truth. The entire world economy is a pyramid, at the base of which lie our lives, processed into profit for the top. If in the 19th century they took away our land, and at the beginning of the 20th, financial independence, then the mid-20th century became the time when they took away our very ability to survive autonomously. This was not a random evolution of technologies, but a planned operation to create total dependence. We were transplanted from natural resources onto the artificial needle of infrastructure, which those holding the switch can disconnect at any moment. Look at your refrigerator. Do you think it's a great boon of civilization? From the standpoint of comfort, undoubtedly. But from the standpoint of freedom, it's a leash. For millennia, people preserved food using salt, fermentation, and drying. These were technologies accessible to everyone. They required no intermediaries. A sack of salt gave a family independence for the whole winter. But suddenly, as if on command, a global campaign begins to demonize salt and promote electric refrigeration. We were told that salt is white death and freshness should be ensured by technology. The result? We forgot how to preserve food. Now, if the power is out for 3 days, the contents of your refrigerator will rot, and you will be on the brink of starvation. You are tied to the outlet, and thus, to the power plant, to tariffs, to the switch. They made us dependent on a grid we don't control. Precisely in this period, in the mid-last century, the great reset of everyday life occurs. Strict building codes and zoning rules are introduced. Think about this absurdity. On your own land, you have no right to build a house as you see fit. You are required to connect to central sewerage, central water supply, common power grid. In most developed countries, off-grid life is legally prohibited or maximally hindered. If you try to live autonomously, collecting rainwater and using a composting toilet, inspectors will come, fine you, and declare your home unfit for living. The system declared autonomy unsanitary. Why? Because an autonomous home doesn't generate profit for utility monopolies. They don't need you to be self-sufficient. They need you to be a subscriber. The culmination of this process was the change in human status itself. Recall when the term human resources appeared. This didn't happen by chance. Before that, there were personnel departments, staff, workers. But in the second half of the 20th century, corporate logic finally triumphed over humanism. Man was officially renamed a resource, raw material, the same as oil, coal, or timber. A resource has no rights. It has characteristics: wear and tear, depreciation, operating costs. We stopped being seen as creators and citizens. We began to be accounted for as inventory on the balance sheet of the global corporation Earth. This change was cemented in the education system. School finally turned into a conveyor belt producing narrow specialists. In the 19th century, an engineer could build a bridge, design a house, and repair a watch. Today's specialist knows only his narrow function. This is called learned helplessness. We were divided into atoms, each of which can perform only one tiny operation, but completely does not understand how the whole works. If the distribution system is removed, the modern urbanized person will perish because he doesn't know where water comes from or how bread grows. We have become like house pets that will die if the owner stops pouring food into the bowl. Consumer rights protection laws, with which they love to reassure us, are actually laws protecting monopolies. They created such high barriers to market entry that no lone artisan can overcome them. Try to officially sell a jar of homemade jam or a sweater you knitted yourself. You will need so many certificates, analyses, and permits that it becomes economically senseless. Thus, the system cleared the space of creators, leaving only big players. The market that is supposedly free is in reality regulated to death. You can choose between Pepsi and Coke, but you cannot choose not to play this game at all. The trap snapped shut quietly. There were no explosions or declarations of war. We simply woke up one day in a world where every action of ours requires a license, and every step leaves a digital trace. We exchanged the right to create for the right to consume. We gave away knowledge of the world in exchange for entertainment. And the scariest thing is that we accepted this cage as the only possible reality. We stopped even dreaming of being masters of our own fate. We dream only of getting a raise or a lower loan rate. We ask the jailer to make the cell cozier instead of looking for a way out. At this moment, when physical and economic dependence became absolute, preparation began for the final stage, digital. But the base for it was laid precisely when they took away our right to land, right to build, right to heal, and right to knowledge. They turned us into biomass, ready for management through algorithms. The old methods of carrot and stick are outdated. In the new reality, the cage is not needed because the prisoner himself fears going outside. He has unlearned how to live in freedom. He fears silence, fears darkness, fears responsibility. He is the ideal resource, an uninterrupted source of energy for a system that long ago lost its human face.